No fucking clue. Okay.
Right.
So we'll see if there's anything usable from this, but this is good conversation. So we'll maybe there's something we can take. So the discussion being about why don't you walk through that again one more time? And then that way we have some context and we can lead this up by saying what we're talking about is a change. What would be the ideal schedule that would make a company as productive as possible, a creative company or consulting company or something like that? What would be the schedule, the pattern of working that would lead to the most productive outcomes? And Chris, you have a model that you think might work quite well, predicated on an idea of rest. So walk through that model.
Yeah. So part of this is not just most productive, but actually getting the smartest people permanently.
Yeah.
And so I think that's because this isn't the most productive model because there's so much time off that
Mhm.
you can't possibly be as productive as somebody who's working more time.
Productive versus impact, though, like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's a whole other discussion. Yeah.
the, just throwing it out there, right? So but my thought, and I was going through this process years ago, and I was talking to one of my friends, and we were talking about like a manifesto for what would be the perfect company for acquiring, keeping the smartest people, while paying them well, but not necessarily paying them crazy. Now, my definition of well versus crazy has changed a lot over the years. But so in this case, it's the concept that uh, the smartest people tend to burn out a lot, because and like smartest maybe it isn't the right word, but a lot of people who are highly productive burn out. And so one of the things, there was a company in Orlando that was doing educational videos a long time ago, and they did Fridays off. And they got a lot of people, and they kept them at a lower salary, and they were trying, like Facebook and Google were trying to poach their developers, and they were not successful.
It was Treehouse, right? Out of
Yeah,
Orlando.
Treehouse. Yep.
Yep.
And they had Fridays off. Eventually, they added Fridays, and they had turnover. Shocker, right? So like, because there's this constant pressure to always improve, and I think that has to do with VC funding and everything else. But if you are a private company who's not beholden to shareholders to eke out the maximum potential growth, I think you can stick to Fridays off. And
Mhm.
ironically, my brother works for Fannie Mae, and I think they have half day Fridays, and they've had them for a long time. And it's one of the things that they've been doing to keep people happy. So
Mhm.
anyway, Fridays off. That gives you 52 Fridays off a year. So that is a lot of time off, right? Right. Most people get 20 days off a year or something like that. Like, boom, right out of the gate, you've already beat that. Well, then
Mhm.
there's the concept of like, what is a work cycle? And there's a lot of conversation about sprints versus like in Basecamp, they have Shape Up, which is like a 6 week cycle, and and everything else. And I think um the ultimate cycle is longer than 1 or 2 weeks, right? To build really impactful big things, it is bigger than 1 or 2 weeks. The flip side is um you can't make it too long. Well, so how do most businesses operate? They operate on some sort of a quarterly cycle. So, in my opinion, operating on a quarterly cycle is the right approach. Okay. So that gives you 4 build cycles a year. And this is I think pretty like an interesting approach. 4 build or thinking cycles a year. Really, project cycles. And originally this was for like a think tank with the idea that, companies would be engaging for a quarterly basis anyway. So the thinking is, you start the first week of each quarter with a planning cycle where everybody gets together, that's part of the team, not just the executives. They look at the things that we have to do. They iterate, they plan, they have like a design sprint for that week, and they just go ham about the potentiality. And by Friday, they agree on the direction. Then you have a 6 week cycle, given that most quarters are roughly 8 weeks. You have a thinking cycle, a planning cycle. You have a 6 week building cycle, and then you have a 1 week rest cycle,
Mhm.
and you just repeat that process. And so now you work hard the whole quarter, right? You have a week off. So now you have 4 dedicated weeks off. All right. So you subtract that. Plus you have 48 Fridays off, right? So you're getting 68 days off in a year. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting ideas is that there's no guilt associated with this time off. Right.
Right.
Yeah. You still have a few extra days that you could take over the course of the year, 5 or 10, doesn't really matter. There's most people don't end up taking their I almost never took all my time off. And it's
Nope, most
because
people don't.
I felt guilty because my team still had to do stuff and I was still beholden to my team.
Mhm.
If the whole team can take off at the same cycle, there is an inherent reduction in guilt, an inherent increase in the quality of the time off.
Yep.
Everyone feels better on like Christmas. No one feels bad about taking Christmas off because the whole team's off.
Yep.
No one feels bad about not checking their email on Christmas because everybody's off. And so
Right.
if you build that into that cycle, you have this psychological different time off, right?
Yep.
Like everyone's off on Friday. I can relax. I can take 3 days and recycle, right? I can reset. And so it's not just, hey, there's Fridays off. It's not just, hey, there's the last week of the quarter is off. It's, hey, I'm actually off. The team is actually off. And the way our cycle works is we built successfully during our 6 to 7, 8 weeks, depending on the quarter. And my next week is a planning week. Like I can actually take this time and relax and reset. And so you're building a cycle of working hard Monday through Thursday, resetting a mini reset, and then after the end of the quarter, doing that exact same thing going into going in the next quarter for the quarters. So anyway, that's my thought process there. It's not just, hey, there's time off, and that time off is shared time off, and it's a safe time off, and it's a true reset time off. And frankly, if you gave me that schedule and you said, hey, here's 200 grand a year, I'd be like, ooh, yeah, I'd probably take it forever. Right. Like, hey, it's not like I want to make 400 grand a year, but like I couldn't do it working that schedule.
Quality of life is just so much better, right? And quality
Right.
of life is important. And I think there's a number of different interesting things here. One is I think you made a really interesting statement about the fact that kind of when you take off time and everybody else is off, like right now, today, we're closed, right? Our office is closed today. Our office is closed on Monday. I'm off all day today, which means that like I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel like I have to check my email. I don't feel like I have to watch Slack because even though when I take time off, I try to not do that. I kind of have in the back of my mind, like the machine is still running and I need to sort of every now and then just peek in the window and make sure that it's like, I'm not working, but I'm just observing the machine to make sure, right? But when the machine is shut down, we can all completely disconnect, which is a much healthier way to rest. It's a much more full and much more restorative rest. And so this idea about more synchronized time off, I think is a fascinating concept for that reason, actually. And because you're right, you know, one of the big problems with places when they have unlimited vacation policies, we have an unlimited vacation policy. It's becoming more and more common. It's probably the most common in tech.
But it's an awful policy, by the way.
It's awful policy because no one ever takes it.
Every company that I've seen that implement it, time off has decreased and instead of increased, which is not the well, for some people it is the intention, but it's not the stated intention.
No.
But the problem is if you don't know how much time off is safe,
exactly, you won't take any.
You won't take any.
We have a minimum. You have to take 2 weeks off where we are. Have to. You're forced. If you get to the end of the year and you've not taken your time off, guess what? You're taking the last 2 weeks of the year off.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, like I love that. And if you were continuing down this path of like how to truly impact people's lives beyond a salary, right? So it's like, hey, here's your time off. But also there's a company that does there besides minimum time off, there's paid vacation. Have you heard of that? Paid vacation is my favorite perk ever. And so the concept of paid vacation is when you take time off, if you actually fly somewhere and don't go for a staycation, you get a $5,000 bonus to take your family somewhere. and actually have a vacation. So yes, you get paid because you have paid PTO, but it's a paid vacation because you're actually taking a vacation and not just taking time off. They pay you a $5,000 bonus with the caveat that you have to write like a 1-page summary of what you did and what you were and did, and share it with the team so everyone gets the ability to join from your cultural or whatever experiences that you had, and they can like live vicariously through you. And so people are sharing these experiences of going to Paris with their family or going to New York and and they talk about the show they saw and what they liked. And yeah, so it takes 30 minutes for you to write a summary and share it. But it's like, okay, for $5,000, I'll gladly write a 30-minute summary. And my family gets to experience something like that.
And really just wear the AI pin and just have it write the summary.
Oh, shush you, shush. But tell me that isn't like if you talk about layering perks.
Yeah.
And a lot of the big companies layer perks, but the problem is like they're layering perks for the explicit purpose of having you stay and work longer.
Right.
And I'm talking about the exact opposite, making the perks actually impact somebody's life and quality of life so that they're happy.
And they'll be a more productive worker when they're happy.
Yeah.
And relaxed. I mean, 100%, that's not even up for debate, right? Like that is been proven time and time again. So here's a couple things I want to mention about that. Other things that I found interesting. One is I think the hard part for this for so many companies is we still have a cultural fascination with trading hours for dollars. And so many companies are made up of the idea that like, you need to work this minimum number of hours because we have an assumption or a model that says like, if everybody works this many hours, we should make this much money. Really what the focus should be is how much money can we make in the least amount of time possible? That should always be the focus, right? Because if we can, now the problem with that is that you want to maximize profits. So then you're like, well, if we can make all this money in 20 hours a week, we could double it in 40. The problem with that is that's not true, right? There is actually a point at which that rolls off. It is not a linear increase, right? It's actually it has like a shape to it. And so I think that's a big cultural thing that we as a culture in work are going to have to confront. And I do think that AI is going to force us to confront that. Because there are going to be companies that do, and they're going to outcompete everybody that don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said this already, but like I absolutely was thinking about this in the terms of a think tank to start, right? So the idea was that it was a small team, and that that team would essentially be focused on solving an issue for a company on any given quarter. And so it was 100% wrapped around the idea of solving a problem and not selling time. So it's like, hey, there's a pod. That's another thing. I believe in pods, but we can talk about like team structures later. But like, there's a pod, and the pod is a 4-person team, and they're doing this, and okay, so let's say everybody on the team's at 200 grand a year. So it's 800 grand a year to employ all of them, right? Let's call it $1 million, right? Make it easy. It's $1 million to employ all of them. So it's 250 grand a quarter to have your pod operational. Simple math, right? It's a very, very, so, okay. So you charge 500 grand and you have, hey, you're getting, 2 PhDs, 4 masters or whatever, between the pod, because the idea is that you're getting the best and the brightest, and they'll work with you for a quarter to try to help you solve your problems, and then you go from there. So that was the thinking. It was divorcing time completely and just selling the whole pod for a quarter. Now, this also works for software development, 100%, right? Like that, but this was more of a consulting thought process the original time around.
Yeah. The thing that I also think is really interesting about it is it actually builds into it a pattern, a cultural mandate, which I think is missing in a ton of companies. I would say missing in almost all companies. 99% of companies don't do this, which is 99% of companies don't ship. They don't get shit out the door fast and get it in the hands of customers. They have these long projects that draw out for years and never launch, and it gets protracted and expensive, and teams change, and the people managing it change, and there's no continuity, and the thing never happens. And what I think is interesting about this way of thinking is you actually structure the company around these kind of quarterly sprints. And what's interesting about having the planning week and ending with the rest week is that we all know we have to get it done and shipped before the rest week. Yeah. And so now it changes us from I go in and I work for 8 hours and I just kind of do stuff, and then maybe one day this thing will get done, to no, there's 10 weeks now, and you get the thing done in 10 weeks. Go fucking get it done and get it shipped. And I think that actually is probably the most catalyzing thing about this, is that it is a forcing function that forces the culture to align around shipping as opposed to just aligning around doing stuff and looking like you're working.
By the way, obviously, this is the problem with just talking instead of having your script ahead of time. A quarter is 16 weeks. I don't know why I said 8.
Yeah, 16. I was thinking 12. Sorry, 14 weeks, whatever it is. Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's yes, but there's a finite amount of time, and I think that is actually super important. And that I'm a big believer in the theory of constraints, right? And so, like, constraining it to say, but also what's really interesting is constraining with a reward. Like, it has to be done by the end of this period, and you have a week off after.
It has to be done, and that is what you are engaged on. Your performance evaluation is not, did you show up for the amount of hours? Did you whatever? Your performance evaluation is, did you get the thing shipped? And not did the thing work, not did it like actually accomplish its goal. I mean, ultimately you should track against that, but that's missing the point. The point is to develop, and I talk with a buddy of mine about this all the time. Shipping is a muscle. Shipping is a muscle that you have to develop. And the shipping muscle atrophies in most organizations because they don't get used to it and they don't feel comfortable with it. And shipping stuff into the real world hurts and is uncomfortable because you get feedback that what you made is not great. That's just kind of part of shipping stuff, right? And so the point is to develop that cycle that basically strengthens the shipping muscle, right? And every quarter is a workout that is building the shipping muscle more and more often. And over time, the company gets better and faster and more effective at getting shit into the world that makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of reasons why I like this process. And here's one of them, that bringing on new employees is hard, right? And so, and part of that is most companies do planning on an annual basis, right? And so if you bring somebody on board, you're not really bringing them into the full cycle until they've been there for maybe almost 23 months.
Right.
But if your full cycle is a quarter, like is no annual process because everything is a quarterly process.
Right.
No one cannot have gone through the whole process in 90. They go through it in 90 days. Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating concept.
I mean, it is fascinating because the other thing that like that starts to kind of hint at, and I think is also interesting, is this actually sort of gets the company culturally working and thinking in these ideas of sprints, which is smaller, more compressed, intense bouts of work. And I think the fact of the matter is we do plan things on an annual basis. Now, yes, we have quarterly goals and OKRs and all that kind of horseshit, right? But we always talk about goals in terms of annual goals. What are we going to do in 2024? What's our goal in 2024? What's the growth in 2024? And I think that the problem with annual goals is a year's a long fucking time. And it's exhausting to get through a year. And you get about 60 to 80% through a year, and you just have lost energy. You're distracted. You're onto a different thing, whatever. So the year timeline is too long. You have to make the timelines and the chunks of work shorter to be effective.
Yeah. I mean, I know me, and I know my own motivations. So if I got truly in a quarterly basis, imagine exceeding a customer's or your own internal company's, desires on a quarterly basis, and actually being bonused on a quarterly basis instead of an annual basis. So you go into your rest week and you end up with, a $5,000 bonus going into your rest week. You're like, holy shit, I'm going to go spend that $5,000 and make my rest week even better. Like the whole concept is wrapped around this idea of like just recharging people and keeping them engaged instead of going a whole year. Like quarterly goals suck because most of the time they're not tied to your bonuses till the end of the year anyway.
Yeah.
And so I concept of quarterly, lots of time off, dedicated planning time, organizationally, not, and then, align. So one of the things is like disagree and commit, right? So the idea of like, hey, that first planning week, by Friday, everyone's got to have disagreed and commit. It's like, it's not necessarily a democracy. It might be, but if everyone can disagree and commit, they only have to commit to something for a quarter before the next cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just try it for 3 months, right? Because trying something for 3 months is a lot easier than trying something for a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if your team, and I've seen this, what is it Price's Law? Let me Google this real quick. Price's Law. Yeah. So have you heard Price's Law?
Maybe.
One of my favorites. What is Price's Law? According to Price's Law, in any group of people, approximately 50% of the work is done by the square root of the total number of people. So, for example, in a group of 100 people, the top 10 people are responsible for 50% of the output.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
So Price's Law is essentially saying the larger your organization, the less people are getting shit done, and the less the average person is doing. And the more important, that square root of that number is.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The whole concept with this is to destroy Price's Law.
Right.
Because you have to have everyone engaged for this kind of structure to work. If you're going to get every Friday off, if you're going to get 4 weeks off,
everybody's got to be in and busting.
Everyone's got to be there and kicking ass.
Yeah.
Right? And I have absolutely seen in my own teams 2 or 3 people generate the output of 20 or 30 people of the other people, right? And if you can tap into that, you can have a transformative organization.
Yep.
By the way, Price's Law, one of my most favorite, fascinating, and at the same time disturbing laws.
It's horribly depressing, actually. Yeah. Very interesting discussion. I think that it'll be interesting to see. I think this is very timely because I think we're in a time right now when the nature of work is changing very quickly. We are finally, I think AI is going to be able to finally pull us out of the industrial revolution way of thinking in terms of production and get into a different mode of work. And I think these are the kind of topics that are going to be more and more relevant over the next decade for sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to read 4 examples of Price's Law of routine.co. So scientific research, for science research, in any given field, 100 researchers, only 10 of them are responsible for about 50% of significant discoveries or papers. In software development, a team of 50 engineers, 7 of them are responsible for the most critical code and innovations.
Without a doubt. I mean, there's no doubt that is true.
In a sales team of 100 people, 10 people are responsible for roughly half the deals. And in corporate management, hundreds of managers, only a small portion of them are actually responsible for the successful initiatives and projects.
Yep.
And it's just like everyone who hears that's like, well, no kidding. And it's like, well, guys, it's not that everyone else sucks. It's that like organizations and teams are almost set up to enable that.
Mm-hmm. The question is what we're talking about actually just the effects of normal distribution, meaning that in any normal distribution of people doing work, you will have a normal distribution, meaning it will have a bell curve, and you will have the largest amount of productivity being produced by the small bit that are the overperformers at the front side of the curve. And so the question is this actually just a law of physics that you can't get around?
And the answer for that, and a sufficiently large organization, I believe, is yes. So I think one of the trends we've talked about is the idea of smaller and smaller organizations.
Yep.
the smaller the organization, the less that will hold true. And the more you have to rely on everybody. By the way, also, the less you can hide. The smaller the organization, you can't hide. A big organization, you can hide. All right. You can hide your results.
Right.
So I'm a big believer that if you can keep your team small,
Mm-hmm.
you can have this output. And so we've talked about, solopreneur, millionaire solopreneurs, right? $1 million businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to think a solopreneur is way too much stress. I am a solopreneur right now, and it is stressful as hell. But if I
Mm-hmm.
could get a team of 4 to 5 people, that to me is about perfect.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough people that you can trust and work with.
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3, still not a bad thing. Going it by yourself is much more difficult. But if you have 3 people, nobody can slack off.
Correct.
So,
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole, like, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go with somebody else.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we're going to stop recording and we're going to get back to the other project we were working on. If I can find the stop recording button.